What happens when a scientist discovers something that should not exist? Not a new theory, not a minor improvement, but a breakthrough powerful enough to change physics, medicine, energy, or even the nature of human consciousness itself. Across different countries and across different decades, a disturbing pattern appears again and again. A researcher makes an impossible claim. A private demonstration shocks the people in the room. A laboratory is suddenly shut down. The data disappears. And then, in the most unsettling cases of all, the scientist vanishes too. Some were said to have discovered particles moving faster than light. Some claimed they could photograph consciousness, alter DNA with sound, or make physical objects disappear from sight. Others built machines that promised limitless energy, direct thought transfer, or even control over time itself. Official explanations always follow the same script: stress, professional misconduct, psychological instability, accidents. Yet when these stories are placed side by side, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Because this is not just a story about invention. It is a story about erasure, about ideas that may have gone too far, about discoveries that may have threatened systems too large to challenge, and about the men and women who reached for something extraordinary, only to disappear just as their work began to matter. In this video, we're going to examine 10 scientists who vanished after creating forbidden inventions. And the first case begins deep beneath the mountains of Italy, where one physicist may have briefly recorded something that should have been impossible under the laws of modern physics. Top 1. The light speed breaker. In 1997, deep beneath the Apennine Mountains of Italy, inside the Gran Sasso National Laboratory, a little-known theoretical physicist named Dr. Emil Varga was working on what appeared to be a routine timing calibration experiment. Officially, the project was classified as a minor technical study connected to long baseline neutrino detection. It was not supposed to be important. It was not supposed to attract attention, and it was certainly not supposed to threaten the foundations of modern physics. Varga's role was simple on paper. He had been assigned to analyze neutrino arrival times using a modified synchronization protocol tied to atomic clock references in laser-based calibration. Most senior researchers considered the work redundant. The system had already been tested. The margins of error were believed to be understood. But during one late-night session, Varga noticed something that made no sense. A cluster of neutrinos appeared to arrive earlier than light itself would have traveled the same distance under identical conditions. At first, he assumed the result had to be a technical error. There was no other explanation. According to modern physics, nothing with mass or information should be able to exceed the speed of light. That limit is not just a number. It is one of the pillars holding together causality, relativity, and the entire structure of contemporary science. So Varga did what any careful physicist would do. He recalibrated the clocks, he replaced fiber optic components, he reran the experiment over multiple cycles, he checked the synchronization hardware again and again. But the anomaly remained. The difference was tiny, measured in nanoseconds. Yet it was consistent, and that consistency was what made it terrifying. Because if even one particle could arrive faster than light, then the implications would be enormous. Cause and effect would no longer be fixed in the way physics assumes. The order of events could become unstable. Time itself, at least at the most fundamental level, would no longer behave as expected. According to later references to Varga's private notes, he understood exactly how dangerous such a result would be. He reportedly refused to submit the data through official academic channels. Instead, he requested additional lab time and tighter isolation from the main research team. He wanted to verify everything privately before anyone else saw it. 3 days after his final recorded entry, Dr. Varga entered the underground laboratory at 3:42 in the morning. Security logs confirmed that his access badge was used. Surveillance footage captured him walking into the lower corridor carrying a metal briefcase. No camera ever showed him leaving. Later that same day, outside personnel reportedly arrived at the facility. They were not listed as civilian contractors, university staff, or standard laboratory visitors. Technicians later claimed that sensitive equipment had been removed from Varga's workspace, including modified timing hardware and the spectrometer he had been using for the experiment. His computer drives were confiscated. His office was sealed. The official explanation came weeks later. Laboratory administrators stated that Dr. Varga had suffered from acute psychological stress and had taken an extended leave from research. No hospital records were ever produced. No travel records surfaced. No confirmed public sighting of him was ever reported again. His family later said they were advised not to pursue further inquiry and were told that his work had touched matters connected to national-level research interests. Years later, fragments of a timing protocol strikingly similar to Varga's modified design reportedly surfaced in a classified defense-related patent filed without attribution. The original research data was never recovered. If Emil Varga truly recorded particles exceeding the speed of light, then his discovery would have forced science to confront one of its deepest assumptions. Instead, the experiment disappeared, and so did the man who ran it. Top 2. The Consciousness Camera. In the summer of 2008, at a private neuroscience conference in Kyoto, Japan, an engineer named Takashi Morimoto introduced a device he called the field lens. It was not part of the official program. There were no cameras, no press, and no public announcement. The demonstration took place in a small side room with only a handful of attendees. But according to those who later spoke about it, what happened inside that room was unlike anything they had ever seen. Morimoto claimed the device could capture what he described as conscious energy fields. It was an extraordinary idea. Not brainwaves on a monitor, not electrical activity translated into charts, but something extending beyond the body itself. To most scientists, that claim would have sounded like the collapse of any boundary between neuroscience, physics, and metaphysics. And yet Morimoto insisted the effect could be shown directly. He placed the lens in front of a volunteer's forehead and dimmed the lights. After a brief delay, an image appeared on a projection screen connected to the device. It was not a thermal scan. It was not an MRI overlay. And it was not a digital reconstruction. What the attendees reportedly saw was a shifting translucent form hovering inches above the subject's skin. It looked like a cloud of pale flame without color. The shape fluctuated with the subject's breathing. When the volunteer relaxed, it softened and spread. When the subject became tense, it sharpened. Then Morimoto introduced a second person into the room. This time, the newcomer was visibly agitated. As soon as that happened, the form on the screen reportedly pulsed and changed in response. To the people watching, this was the moment everything became deeply unsettling, because the device did not seem to be passively recording. It appeared to be interacting. According to notes later attributed to the demonstration, the field lens used a combination of near-infrared spectroscopy, low-frequency electromagnetic pulses, and a proprietary sensor grid Morimoto refused to patent. His theory was radical. He believed the brain generated quantum echo patterns that extended beyond the skull into a reactive spatial envelope. In simpler terms, he argued that consciousness was not fully contained inside the body, and if that were true, then it might be possible to record it visually. The reaction from the scientific community was swift. Conference organizers distanced themselves from the presentation. Attendees publicly dismissed it as irresponsible and ungrounded. Morimoto's research assistant was reportedly dismissed from his university position soon after. But what happened next was even stranger. Within a month, the small research facility Morimoto operated on the outskirts of Osaka closed permanently. Local reports claimed the building had been purchased by an unnamed corporate buyer and repurposed for data security testing. All equipment inside was removed overnight. By the end of the year, Morimoto himself had vanished from public life. He was never formally declared missing. But there were no new papers, no interviews, no conference appearances, no trace of new research under his name. Attempts to contact him led only to disconnected phone numbers and shuttered addresses. His website disappeared. Years later, a grainy photograph allegedly taken during the Kyoto demonstration surfaced briefly on a fringe consciousness forum. It showed a human face in profile and, hovering just beyond it, a faint luminous distortion. The image was never authenticated. Then it vanished again. What happened in that room remains a subject of speculation among those who study the borderlands of mind and matter. Because if Morimoto's device truly recorded something outside the brain, then it would not simply redefine neuroscience. It would challenge the most basic assumptions about identity, memory, and what a human being actually is. And if that is true, then disbelief may not have been the real reason his work disappeared. It may have been fear. Top 3. The Fifth Dimension Mathematician. In 2003, during a closed session at the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy, a young German mathematician named Dr. Ulrich Noberg presented an unpublished paper with a title that immediately unsettled the room. The paper was called Topological Bridges Beyond Force Space. At first glance, it sounded like another theoretical exploration of higher dimensions. Physics had long discussed the possibility that additional spatial dimensions might exist beyond the three we experience every day. But Noberg's idea was different. He was not treating the fifth dimension as a distant mathematical abstraction. He was proposing that it might be accessible. According to Noberg, space itself might contain folded structures, hidden layers of geometry that could be temporarily opened under the right physical conditions. His model suggested that, with carefully generated high-frequency torsion fields and a specially designed crystalline lattice structure, it might be possible to create what he called a microportal. Not a wormhole, not a science fiction gateway across the universe, but a small rift in the geometry of space itself. A momentary bridge into another dimension. The audience of physicists and mathematicians reacted with visible discomfort. Some dismissed the idea as speculative mathematics pushed too far. Others, however, were troubled for a different reason. Because according to one anonymous attendee interviewed years later, Noberg's equations were too elegant to ignore. The mathematics worked, or at least it appeared to. Unlike string theory, which treats higher dimensions as tiny and permanently compacted, Noberg's model suggested that the fifth dimension was folded but puncturable. That meant it could, in theory, be reached. Within weeks of the presentation, Noberg began receiving invitations from private research institutions and defense-related think tanks interested in discussing the implications of his work. He declined every offer. Instead, he returned to his small countryside home in Saxony, Germany. Then something strange happened. He stopped responding to emails. Phone calls went unanswered. His university profile disappeared without explanation. His personal website changed to a single blank page. At the center of the page, one sentence appeared: "Topology can collapse from within." Months passed. Then on a cold morning in February 2004, a neighbor noticed something unusual about Noberg's house. The windows had been covered from the inside with reflective foil. There was no smoke coming from the chimney, despite freezing temperatures. Concerned, the neighbor contacted local authorities to perform a welfare check. When police entered the house, they found no signs of struggle, but the house was empty. Every piece of furniture had been removed. Every electronic device was gone. Even the basement laboratory, where Noberg reportedly conducted private calculations and experiments, had been stripped down to bare concrete. Only one thing remained. On the floor of the basement, investigators found a sheet of mathematical equations burned directly into the concrete using what appeared to be a soldering iron. The formulas have never been publicly solved. No official missing person investigation followed. No public announcement was made. According to one former colleague, the case quietly disappeared inside administrative channels. Years later, a patent application filed by an anonymous holding company in Luxembourg appeared in an international database. The design described within it referenced a crystalline lattice structure capable of nonlinear distance compression and transspatial resonance, concepts strikingly similar to Noberg's work. The patent was later withdrawn without explanation. If Ulrich Noberg truly discovered a way to interact with the geometry of higher dimensions, then his disappearance may not have been symbolic. It may have been something far stranger. Because if a doorway into another dimension briefly opened, then the real mystery is not just where he went, but whether he ever came back at all. Top 4. The Magnetic Field Engineer. In 1984, in a quiet industrial suburb of Toronto, an electrical engineer named Martin Kessler publicly demonstrated a machine that, if genuine, should have transformed the future of energy. He called it a closed-loop magnetic induction engine. According to Kessler, the device could produce continuous rotational force without any visible external fuel source. The demonstration took place inside a rented warehouse. The audience was small: a few independent inventors, one skeptical journalist, and a local television crew from a science program that no longer exists. The machine itself looked crude but imposing, a heavy cylindrical metal structure surrounded by concentric magnetic rings. No power cords were visible. No generator was connected. Yet when Kessler activated it, the device began to spin, and it kept spinning. To the people in the room, that was the moment disbelief turned into unease, because this was not being presented as a perpetual motion machine. Kessler insisted on that point. He said the engine was drawing energy from fluctuating magnetic fields in the Earth's crust through a process he called ambient magnetic harvesting. In other words, he believed the machine was not creating energy from nothing. It was tapping into a source conventional science had ignored. The local television crew filmed the demonstration, but the footage was never broadcast. Shortly afterward, the station was reportedly purchased by a larger network, and the episode featuring Kessler's engine was pulled from the schedule indefinitely. The journalist who had attended, Anna Del Mar, later wrote that engineers from an unnamed government liaison group contacted her after the event and requested all her notes. The reason given was national energy security. Kessler, meanwhile, attempted to protect his invention through legal channels. He filed for a patent. The application was denied almost immediately. The official explanation was technical and familiar. Perpetual motion devices are not patentable. But Kessler argued that his engine was not perpetual motion at all. It was energy conversion through a mechanism mainstream physics had failed to recognize. That distinction made no difference. Within months, the situation escalated. A major energy consortium accused him of violating intellectual property connected to electromagnetic turbine systems. Lawsuits followed. Funding disappeared. Then, according to later accounts, his bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Kessler gave what would become his final public statement during a community forum. He said, "I did not invent a miracle. I revealed a blind spot." Not long afterward, he vanished. His home in Scarborough was found empty. All blueprints, machine parts, and technical notes were gone. Neighbors later reported seeing unmarked vans outside the property in the middle of the night 2 days before his disappearance. Local police declined to investigate seriously, citing no evidence of foul play. When Anna Del Mar tried to follow up, she was told that Kessler had relocated under duress and that further inquiry was not in the interest of public order. Years later, one of the people who had attended the original 1984 warehouse demonstration reportedly surfaced with a surviving copy of the video. But before it could be published, the footage was flagged and removed from multiple platforms. Takedown notices cited copyright claims from unknown rights holders. Attempts to re-upload the material resulted in the same outcome. Even offline archives were said to have become corrupted. The footage has never resurfaced publicly. If Martin Kessler truly developed a system capable of harvesting the Earth's magnetic field to generate clean, continuous motion, then his disappearance represents more than the silencing of one inventor. It represents the burial of a technology that could have altered the global energy system. And perhaps the most haunting part of the story is not how the machine worked, but why so much effort seems to have gone into making sure the world never saw it again. Top 5. The Sonic Cell Healer. In 2011, a biophysicist from Argentina named Dr. Alejo Barragan introduced a device that, according to early reports, could heal damaged human tissue using nothing but precisely calibrated sound frequencies. At first, the idea sounded almost unbelievable. For decades, medicine had relied on surgery, pharmaceuticals, and chemical therapies to repair the body. Barragan's claims suggested something very different. He believed that the human body might be able to repair itself far faster if the right vibrational signals were applied to damaged cells. His research was conducted in collaboration with a private hospital affiliated with the University of La Plata. The device itself was compact. It used a system of high-resolution acoustic emitters designed to deliver extremely precise sound frequencies directly into injured tissue. According to Barragan's theory, these frequencies caused microscopic oscillations in cellular membranes. Those oscillations appeared to accelerate protein synthesis and mitochondrial repair, essentially pushing damaged cells into an intense regenerative state. Early trials produced results that stunned medical observers. One of the most widely discussed cases involved a patient suffering from second-degree burns. Using the sonic treatment over several sessions, the damaged tissue reportedly began healing at an unusually rapid rate. Within days, the wound surface area had reduced dramatically. Within weeks, the injury had healed with almost no visible scarring. And remarkably, the treatment required no drugs and no surgical intervention. Doctors who witnessed the trials reportedly struggled to explain what they were seeing. If the results could be replicated, the implications were extraordinary. Burn injuries, muscle tears, degenerative diseases. Even internal tissue damage might one day be treated without invasive procedures. Yet despite the excitement among those who had seen the early experiments, something strange happened next. No scientific paper was ever published. None of the trial data appeared in medical journals. Within weeks, the university quietly terminated its collaboration with Berrigan. Officials cited concerns about methodological transparency, but no detailed explanation was ever given. Berrigan attempted to present his research at a regenerative medicine conference in Geneva later that year. When he arrived, his presentation slot had been canceled. Airport security reportedly confiscated his equipment during a screening. The device was never returned. After returning to Argentina, Berrigan withdrew almost completely from public life. Colleagues who visited his private laboratory on the outskirts of Tigre noticed dramatic changes. Security cameras had been installed throughout the building. Biometric locks controlled access to the research rooms. For a scientist previously known for openly sharing ideas, the shift was deeply unsettling. Then in October 2012, local news outlets reported a tragic accident. Berrigan's car had veered off a bridge and plunged into the Paraná River. The vehicle was eventually recovered, but his body was never found. Authorities concluded the crash had been caused by mechanical failure. Yet mechanics familiar with the vehicle later stated that the car had been fully serviced just days before the incident. Not long afterward, Berrigan's laboratory was sealed, equipment was removed, his research vanished. Years later, an Argentine military document briefly referenced a non-invasive biological accelerator before the text was heavily redacted in subsequent releases. If Berrigan's sonic technology truly worked as early observers claimed, it could have revolutionized modern medicine. A world where damaged tissue could regenerate without drugs or surgery would fundamentally change healthcare. But instead of transforming hospitals, the discovery faded into silence, leaving behind one lingering question. Was Berrigan's invention simply too disruptive for a medical system built around long-term treatment? Or did he uncover a biological principle someone believed the world was not ready to use? Top 6. The Thought Transfer Physicist. In 1995, inside the Neurophysics Division of the French National Center for Scientific Research, known as CNRS, a young experimental physicist named Dr. Lucien Artaud began exploring an idea that many of his colleagues initially dismissed as impossible. He called it non-local information fields. The theory suggested that under specific conditions, two human brains might be able to exchange information without any physical connection. At the time, the idea sounded closer to philosophy than physics, but Artaud believed that consciousness might produce measurable patterns capable of interacting beyond the body. His approach combined quantum entanglement models with neurochemical resonance. In simple terms, he proposed that once a thought was stabilized into a measurable brainwave pattern, it might be possible to transmit it, almost like a radio signal, from one mind to another. To test the theory, Artaud constructed a unique experimental system. Two sealed isolation pods were placed in separate rooms. Each chamber was equipped with full-spectrum EEG scanners, ultra-low frequency transmitters, and multiple layers of Faraday shielding designed to block every known form of electromagnetic interference. Two volunteers were then placed inside the pods. One participant would focus on a simple image, often a geometric shape such as a square, triangle, or circle. The second participant had only one instruction: describe whatever image appeared in their mind. At first, the results seemed random, but as the experiments continued, something unusual began to appear in the data. Over dozens of trials, the receiving subject began correctly identifying the image chosen by the sender far more often than probability allowed. The statistical pattern was impossible to ignore. The accuracy rate climbed well beyond what random guessing could explain. Artaud reportedly continued the experiments for over a year without informing the full research department. He collected data quietly, refining the equipment and repeating the tests. But eventually, word of the results began circulating inside CNRS. When administrators discovered the unauthorized experiments, Artaud was summoned before an ethics review board. He was accused of conducting unsanctioned human experimentation. Funding was revoked. The equipment was confiscated. The research was officially terminated. Yet strangely, just 1 week later, Arto was scheduled to present a revised theoretical paper titled Cognitive Interference in Non-Local Fields at a scientific symposium in Zurich. He never arrived. The night before his scheduled flight, Arto reportedly locked himself inside his research apartment in Toulouse. According to building records, the door was never opened again. When police forced entry several days later, the apartment appeared untouched. Food remained on the table. Lights were still on. His passport, wallet, and personal belongings were still inside, but Arto himself was gone. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of escape. Only one detail stood out. Written in blue chalk on the wall above his desk were two simple words: "It worked." After the incident, CNRS issued no formal public statement. Arto's name quietly disappeared from research registries. His previous projects were removed from internal archives. Months later, a technology startup in California announced work on something they called synthetic empathy protocols, a system designed to simulate emotional signals between neural networks. Some observers quietly speculated that Arto's research might have been absorbed into private development, but none of the company's founders ever acknowledged his work, and attempts to contact them about the connection reportedly received no reply. If Lucien Arto truly demonstrated the ability to transmit thoughts directly between two human minds, the implications would be staggering. Locked-in patients could communicate again. Language barriers could disappear. Human interaction itself could be transformed, but there would also be darker possibilities. If thoughts could be transmitted, they could also be intercepted. And if minds could connect directly, privacy might cease to exist. Perhaps that is why his work vanished. Because some discoveries do not just change technology, they change what it means to be human. Top 7, the DNA harmonizer. In 2006, in a quiet laboratory on the outskirts of Bern, Switzerland, a geneticist named Dr. Helena Zelena claimed she had discovered something extraordinary. According to her research, it might be possible to alter the behavior of human DNA using nothing but precisely tuned sound frequencies. The idea sounded almost impossible. For decades, genetic science had relied on chemical signals, enzymes, and molecular editing tools to influence gene expression, but Zelena believed DNA might respond to something far more subtle. She proposed that genetic activity could be influenced through vibrational resonance, similar to how a musical note can cause a glass to vibrate. Her theory suggested that DNA, like any physical structure, could respond to specific patterns of frequency. If those frequencies were tuned correctly, dormant genes might activate, and harmful genetic activity might be suppressed. Zelena was not an outsider in the scientific world. She held dual doctoral degrees in molecular biology and acoustic physics, and her earlier research had been published in respected scientific journals. Her experiments were conducted in carefully controlled laboratory conditions using cultured fibroblast cells. The cells were exposed to sound waves generated by a specialized transducer capable of producing extremely precise harmonic frequencies. After repeated exposure, something unusual appeared in the results. Certain dormant genes began to activate. These genes were associated with cellular repair, anti-inflammatory responses, and tissue regeneration. Even more controversially, Zelena claimed that specific frequencies appeared to stimulate partial telomere restoration. Telomeres are the protective structures at the ends of chromosomes. They naturally shorten as cells age. If their length could be restored, it could theoretically slow or even reverse aspects of cellular aging. Zelena understood the implications. Her discovery suggested that aging itself might be influenced through sound-based genetic modulation. Yet despite the potential significance, she never submitted her research to scientific journals. Instead, she presented her findings privately during a closed meeting with an exclusive group of biotech investors in Geneva. According to individuals who later described the meeting, the atmosphere quickly became tense. Some investors pushed for immediate commercialization. Others appeared disturbed by the possible consequences. Because if Zelena's method worked, it could fundamentally disrupt entire sectors of biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, and medical treatment. Just days after the meeting, Zelena withdrew from public communication. Emails went unanswered. Her laboratory in Bern was discovered abandoned 2 weeks later. The research servers had been completely wiped. Backup drives stored inside a fireproof safe were missing. Surveillance cameras covering the property had been disabled for more than 72 hours before the discovery. Local authorities briefly investigated the site as a possible break-in, but no formal police report was ever filed. Soon afterward, Zelena's name quietly disappeared from university directories. Her academic email stopped functioning. Her social media profiles were deleted. Former colleagues claimed she had accepted a private research position overseas, yet no research institute ever confirmed employing her. Years later, an anonymous scientific paper appeared briefly on a restricted online forum dedicated to experimental biotechnology. The document described a system of acoustic gene modulation using terminology nearly identical to Zelena's earlier work. The file remained online for less than 8 hours before it was removed. No trace of the original upload was ever recovered. Speculation about Zelena's fate remains divided. Some believe she was silenced because her discovery threatened existing industries. Others think she may have chosen to disappear voluntarily, selling her research to private investors operating in legal gray areas. And a small group of theorists suggests something even stranger, that Zelena may still be working somewhere in secret, refining the technology for purposes far beyond medicine. Because if DNA can truly respond to harmonic frequencies, then biology itself becomes something like a musical instrument, one that could be tuned, modified, and perhaps even redesigned. And if that possibility is real, the question is no longer whether we can rewrite our biology. The question becomes who controls the music. Top 8. The Invisibility Field Researcher. In 1992, inside a classified optics laboratory located in the Mojave Desert, a physicist named Dr. Raymond Collier claimed he had achieved something long considered impossible outside of science fiction. He believed he had created a field capable of rendering an object effectively invisible to the human eye. For decades, scientists had speculated about invisibility. Most theories focused on bending light around objects using advanced materials known as metamaterials. But Collier's approach was completely different. Instead of manipulating light itself, he focused on manipulating human perception. His theory proposed that vision is not simply about what light reaches the eye. It is also about how the brain interprets spatial information. If the visual processing system could be disrupted at exactly the right frequencies, the brain might simply fail to recognize the presence of an object. In other words, the object would still be physically present, but the observer's brain would not register it. To test the idea, Collier constructed an experimental chamber lined with polarized reflective mesh. Inside the chamber, objects were exposed to synchronized microwave interference combined with pulsed electromagnetic feedback. During one of the tests, observers watching through a monitoring window reported something strange. At first, the object appeared to shimmer slightly, then the distortion intensified, and suddenly it was gone. Sensors inside the chamber still detected the object's mass, temperature, and acoustic reflection, but visually it had disappeared. Not hidden, not camouflaged, simply absent from perception. Some observers later described the experience as deeply unsettling. It felt as though reality itself had briefly glitched. Collier carefully documented the results and requested authorization to continue testing. Instead of approval, something very different happened. Within days, he was ordered to undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation. The official diagnosis claimed he was suffering from a stress-induced dissociative episode. His security clearance was suspended. The research project was reassigned. But colleagues who had reviewed the experimental logs privately insisted the data showed no signs of fabrication or instability. If anything, the results suggested a discovery that challenged the basic relationship between observation and reality. 3 months later, Raymond Collier disappeared. The laboratory reported that he had been discharged from the program and returned to his home in Arizona. But when investigators later visited the property, the house was empty. His car remained parked outside. Mail had piled up in the mailbox. A neighbor reported seeing 2 unmarked vans parked outside the home the night before Collier vanished. Security camera footage from the area had been erased. No official missing person investigation was launched. Soon afterward, references to Collier's invisibility research began disappearing from internal laboratory documentation. Even informal mentions of his name were removed from archived communications. Employees who attempted to discuss the project during meetings were warned against spreading classified disinformation. Then one final detail surfaced. A maintenance worker cleaning a storage locker at the original test facility discovered Collier's lab coat sealed inside a container. In the pocket was a photograph. The image showed the experimental chamber standing empty. On the back of the photo, Collier had written a short sentence by hand. What you see isn't always what is there. What is there isn't always seen. If Collier's field truly worked, the implications would reach far beyond military applications. It would force scientists to question how much of reality depends not on what exists, but on what the human brain is capable of perceiving. And perhaps that is the most unsettling form of invisibility of all. Not hiding objects from sight, but hiding truth from the mind that is trying to see it. Top 9. The Cold Fusion Revivalist. In 2009, after nearly a decade of silence, a reclusive chemist named Dr. Semyon Resnik emerged at a small alternative energy summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, with a claim that immediately divided everyone in the room. He said he had achieved what mainstream science had spent years dismissing as impossible, a stable form of cold fusion. For decades, cold fusion had occupied a strange place in scientific history. If real, it promised a nearly limitless source of clean energy produced without the extreme heat, waste, or radiation associated with conventional nuclear reactions. But ever since the failed and discredited claims of the late 20th century, most serious physicists treated the subject as scientific poison. Careers had been destroyed over it, reputations buried, and yet Resnick arrived with a compact tabletop device and insisted that the phenomenon could be demonstrated directly. According to witnesses, the presentation took place behind closed doors. There were no official cameras, no public live stream, only a small audience of researchers, investors, and energy insiders. The machine itself was simple in appearance, a metal chamber containing palladium electrodes submerged in heavy water. But once activated, the system began producing sustained heat far beyond what its electrical input should have allowed. Calorimetric instruments reportedly confirmed the excess output in real time. More disturbingly, sensitive radiation detectors picked up faint but consistent neutron activity, the kind of signal normally associated with nuclear reaction. Resnick did not behave like a showman. According to those present, he spoke calmly and without drama. He explained that his process relied on a lattice interaction inside the palladium structure, allowing low-temperature nuclear behavior to emerge under very specific conditions. At the end of the presentation, he reportedly said only one sentence that many attendees later remembered. "We have always assumed the future of energy must explode. Perhaps it hums instead." Then the room went silent. What followed was not scientific debate. It was suppression. Within 48 hours, the summit organizers reportedly received legal threats from a consortium of energy investors. The venue canceled all future science-related events. Resnick declined every request for an interview. Even the printed technical sheets distributed during the meeting turned out to contain deliberate errors. According to one journalist who briefly spoke with him afterward, Resnick admitted he had done this intentionally. He wanted to prevent anyone from stealing the full design all at once. Shortly afterward, his apartment in Riga was reportedly broken into. Nothing of obvious value was taken. But friends later said Resnick became convinced he was being watched. He shut down his laboratory, cut off contact with colleagues, and withdrew completely from public view. Then in early 2010, a short obituary appeared in a local newspaper. It stated that Dr. Semyon Resnick had died of a heart attack in his home. No public autopsy was released. The funeral was private. Only 2 unidentified attendees were reportedly present besides the officiant. When independent researchers later attempted to locate the prototype device, they found almost nothing. A scorched laboratory bench, fragments of melted shielding, no blueprints, no functioning components, no verifiable data archive. And yet the story did not end there. In the years that followed, several energy startups quietly filed patents using phrases that sounded disturbingly close to Resnick's language. Low-temperature plasma catalysis, lattice-assisted nuclear transmutation, anomalous heat generation under heavy water saturation. None of those companies acknowledged his work. All were shielded behind complex layers of corporate ownership. If Semyon Resnick truly revived cold fusion, even briefly, then he may have solved one of the greatest energy problems in human history with a machine no larger than a shoebox. But instead of igniting a revolution, his discovery dissolved into silence, denial, and disappearance. And that leaves one final possibility, too unsettling to ignore: that the most dangerous reaction he triggered was not inside the device, but inside the systems built to make sure such a breakthrough never reached the world. Top 10. The Time Compression Experimenter. In 1998, inside a remote experimental facility hidden deep in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, a physicist named Dr. Istvan Koren began testing a theory that sounded impossible, even by the standards of fringe science. He believed time itself could be compressed inside a sealed chamber. Not in the science fiction sense of traveling to the past, not by moving near the speed of light, and not through extreme gravity. Koren's idea was different. He believed that under controlled conditions, it might be possible to create a localized region in which time would pass more slowly relative to the outside world. His theory relied on synchronized rotating electromagnetic fields combined with what internal notes described as scalar wave pulses. Unlike conventional time dilation, which depends on motion or massive gravity wells, Koren's method aimed to distort the rate of temporal flow inside a confined space. The heart of the experiment was a chamber referred to internally as the chronocell. It was lined with a dense lattice of supercooled niobium coils and fitted with synchronized atomic clocks placed both inside and outside the structure. The early trials involved simple test objects: a lit candle, a melting ice cube, a mechanical watch. At first, the results were subtle, but over repeated runs, a pattern emerged. The internal clocks lagged behind the external ones by measurable margins. Video recordings from inside the chamber appeared slightly slower when compared to outside reference footage. At first, the differences were tiny, almost invisible, but with each trial, the lag increased. To Koren, this was not a malfunction. It was proof. He reportedly described the effect not as time travel, but as a temporal sink, a pocket in which time flowed at a different rate than the world around it. If the effect could be stabilized, the implications would be extraordinary. A person could step inside for minutes while far longer passed outside. Medicine, deep space travel, preservation, and even military applications would all be transformed. Koren believed human exposure might be possible if the system was precisely calibrated. Then came the final experiment. According to internal records, Koren entered the chronocell himself for what was supposed to be a 60-minute external test. From his perspective, he expected to experience only a few minutes inside the chamber. Technicians outside monitored the clocks. The system remained stable. 60 minutes passed, then more. The chamber remained sealed. When the team finally opened it, they found something impossible. The chronocell was empty. There was no sign of malfunction, no breach in the chamber walls, no evidence of fire, explosion, or contamination. Security footage clearly showed Koren walking inside. No footage ever showed him leaving. The internal data logs had been wiped. The camera feed from inside the chamber displayed nothing but static. Within days, the facility was shut down. All staff were ordered to sign new confidentiality agreements. Equipment was dismantled and moved to an undisclosed location. When Koren's family demanded answers, they were reportedly told only that he had died during a classified experiment and that no recoverable remains existed. No public research on Romanian temporal compression experiments has ever surfaced since. And that is what makes the case so unsettling. Because if Koren's experiment failed, then where did he go? And if it succeeded, the question becomes even stranger. Did he vanish through space or through time itself? If the flow of time can be altered inside a machine, then Koren may not be dead in any ordinary sense. He may have experienced only minutes while years passed outside, or he may still be trapped inside some unreachable fragment of slowed time, sealed away from the rest of reality. Because in the end, the mystery is not simply where Dr. Istvan Koren disappeared. It is when. When these 10 cases are viewed separately, each one can be dismissed on its own terms. A physicist under pressure, a scientist accused of bad methodology, an inventor ruined by legal attacks, a researcher whose work drifted too far beyond accepted science. Each story has an official explanation: stress, instability, professional misconduct, accident, coincidence. But when these cases are placed side by side, a far more disturbing pattern begins to appear. Again and again, the same sequence repeats. A breakthrough emerges. The discovery threatens something fundamental: physics, medicine, energy, consciousness, time. Then almost immediately the same response follows. The lab is closed, the data disappears, the equipment is removed, the researcher is isolated, and then the scientist vanishes. Not celebrated, not fully investigated, not even properly remembered. That is what makes these stories so unsettling, because this is not the pattern of normal scientific failure. It is the pattern of containment, a system that does not need to publicly destroy an idea in order to bury it. It only needs to erase the person, fragment the evidence, and replace the truth with just enough uncertainty to make everyone else look away. And the cost of that silence may be impossible to measure. A particle that could challenge causality, a device that might record consciousness beyond the brain, a machine that heals tissue with sound, a method for rewriting gene expression through harmonic resonance, a field that bends perception itself, a tabletop energy source that could have ended dependence on entire industries. If even one of these breakthroughs was real, then humanity may already have stood at the edge of futures we were never allowed to enter. That is the deeper fear hidden inside all 10 stories. Not simply that these scientists disappeared, but that they may have been right. Because once a discovery becomes too disruptive, it stops being judged only by whether it is true. It begins to be judged by who would lose power if it were allowed to spread. And that leaves us with one final question. How many world-changing inventions have truly failed? And how many were simply removed before the rest of us ever had the chance to understand them?